we go. Great. Okay, thanks everyone for taking a bit of time to come along to the webinar. As I was saying a moment ago, it will be recorded. So if you know anyone that's missed it, that'll be accessible later on. Topic of the webinar then is use email SMS automation to improve turnaround times. This is something I've been helping a lot of our customers with, and I really wanted just to do a series of webinars to make sure everyone is aware of the feature for one and has a good idea of how it works, so they can sort of deploy it in their practice. For those of you that haven't met me, my name's Ben. I sort of do all the customer interaction at Glide. So if you have got any queries following the webinar, I mean, first of all, I'll be saving 10 minutes at the end here, so we can go through any queries. But if you miss out on that one, just contact me at any time, which you can do, either by calling the office or obviously the little blue widget in the bottom right corner, or just via email. So great. Okay. What I've got planned today then is really, I think, to cover, obviously it's a 1 hour webinar. So in 50 minutes, I'm going to try and cover a bit of everything. And I think what that means is you go away with a rough idea of everything Glide can do. It probably also means that some of the more advanced bits and bobs will probably have a follow-up webinar, and we'll look at those separately. So without further ado, I'm just going to get my screen share up and running. We shall begin. So I'm going to go through this in the sort of order in which you might do things if you're implementing this in your Glide system. So we're going to start off with the boring stuff, unfortunately. I'm just going to keep an eye on the chat as well. Cool, lovely. Okay, just people saying they can hear me. Great. So first things first, where am I? I am in Glide. I've clicked on my business name. So my business is just called Another BN Test, and I've come to Messaging Center. This is really where all the action happens at the moment for email messages and SMS messages. So we have the Messaging Center tab where all our messages are going to be. We have the options, which we're actually going to look at now. And then we have template editor. That's, of course, where we create our templates. So first of all, we have some settings that we need to consider the very first time we start using this. It's a one-off, so to say. We don't need to do this for every template we set up. And these are our from name, from address, oh, Mark, yeah, do jump in with any chats. Yes, there's a couple of new things actually that we released just in time for the webinar. So I will bring those to your attention as I go. Yeah, so that's one of them that we'll see in a moment. There's a couple of others as well. So I'll make sure I include those. Yeah, these settings here are something you set up once and then probably never think about them again. They are your defaults. So it's quite possible you'll actually have more specific settings for particular templates. But supposing you don't, the system would fall back onto these defaults. So it's certainly worthwhile making sure they are, sensible, etc. So the from name, this can be your name or anyone's name or a business name. This is, if you think about logging into Outlook or Gmail, this is typically the main bit of information that will pop up when your client's receiving your message. They're going to see typically the from name. If you go back a couple of decades, they've probably seen an email address, but that tends to be the lesser important bit of information now. So that's the from name. And next we have the from address. And, this wants to be an email address that does exist, and obviously one that you are in control of. Now, there's something really important here that we've started doing, which is, you're going to obviously enter in here one of your emails and it'll be your domain. Now, I'll talk in a moment about server preferences, but by far the most popular server preference is to have Glide sending your emails. We do that via an integration with SendGrid, which is one of the sort of global leaders in reliable email delivery. Now, we are going to be sending a message claiming to be from you. So there's a step we have to do to ensure that's going to work. It's called domain authentication. The way you do it at the moment, it's going to be built in soon, but the way you do it at the moment is you just ping us a message on the chat and say, I'd like to authenticate. In this case, it would be oundleaccountants.com. And that covers us for sending from any email address, anyone's first name here or whatever goes before the @ sign. It covers us for the whole domain. I don't want to get too technical here. This is typically something you offload to your IT people, but in a nutshell, this means that the email sent will have a DKIM signature, and it'll also cover us for SPF policies. And if you have a DMARC policy as well, we're going to pass all those tests. And the great thing about that is when your client receives a message, it's just going to be in the inbox. And we don't have any warnings on it whatsoever. If we don't do that step, there's a risk. It's not guaranteed, but there's a possibility that Outlook, Gmail might go a bit nuclear and pop it in the junk box, or it might just put a little question mark and say, not sure if this is actually Oundle Accountants. It seems to have come from Glide. So that's something really important to do. So if you're not sure if you've done that or whatever, just get in touch. You can either do it manually your end if you sort of know what you're doing, or we can just click a button and it sends you instructions. Dead easy. Cool. I'm trying not to dwell on any of these settings too much, conscious of time. So we then have a default signature. So once again, just a default. If we don't set up a template specific signature, the default will be used. And we can have a BCC. Currently, the BCC is for all emails. This doesn't actually have a template specific setting. Might do in the future. This is really useful where people use things like virtual cabinet. You often can have an email address that if you BCC, it will file everything automatically, which is really cool. And often that also means in your subject line, you want to have the square brackets client code, and it will put it against the right client. Okay, so that's our basic settings. There's some similar stuff going on for SMS as well. Today, I'm going to focus mainly on email. Also, just have a glance at this one. Your emails are set to be queued before sending. That really is the way round that should be. You can toggle it to send, but again, we have a template specific setting. So my general guidance is have your master setting to queue. When you do a new template, have it queuing. That means that when they generate, even if it's automatic, it will go into a queue. We can jump in, we can check we're happy. And once you've seen 10, 20, 30, you can then turn that specific template onto send automatically, and then we're fully automated. That's the way around that I recommend going with this. Of course, some templates will always be queued if you want to be doing manual elements of it. Okay, right, let's move on from the settings now. And now we're moving on to talk about how do we actually create our first template. So if we're doing our second, third template, we'd sort of start here. Okay, so just checking I haven't missed anything on that first bit there. No, we're all good. Cool. So let's jump over to template editor. This is where we, actually create our templates. Yes, Mark, new thing today. We can, rather than having a list of 1 million, we do filter them by workflow system. Now, we've got two types of template, client messages and job messages. Typically, the really clever stuff tends to happen in job messages. They'll be triggered by a job, so like a VAT return, an accounts job, etc., and they have access to all that information on your job card. Client messages are triggered by a client. They can just access the client record. Really useful for things that are not job specific. So like, oh, look, there's a new minimum wage, or there's a new furlough scheme, or whatever. Let's hope not. So today I'm going to focus on the job related messages. Okay. And I've actually set up everything I want to use in today's webinar already. I figured that'd be quicker, and we would just look at it and talk about what I did. So let's just go into edit. But before I do, I just want to point out a couple of things we've mentioned already. Always send, always queue. We don't need to click always queue. That's our master setting. But when we're happy with this email template, when we've seen it going out, we can click always send, and then that's going to cut out the queue, and we've hit the fully automated setup. So that's there. This little number 1 here just means it's being used because I've got it set up. Right, let's click edit. Of course, if you're creating a brand new one, you choose your system and click new template, but I'm going to click edit. Okay. Another new thing last night is the internal name, a long requested feature. So previously we used to refer to things by their subject, but of course a number of templates might have the same subject. So we've got an internal name now. So yeah, in the body of the template here, I guess this is pretty obvious what we're doing, and it's just for me to talk through the different fields we have access to. This is in very much plain text here. Don't worry, they don't actually use this font when we send them. So type out your message, and whenever you want to put in a field, just, obviously get the cursor in the right place and put, the field in, and Bob's your uncle. When we generate the message, we will swap that out for the appropriate bit of data. So let's go through what we've got. I don't actually think they're used too much. Client, now this is talking about the actual client. So the job belongs, of course, to one client, and this is the client here. So we've got client name, client code, some information about the client manager and client partner. Recipient, this is the person receiving the message, and I've got a section at the end of the webinar that hopefully we'll get onto to talk about how you direct a message for client A to recipient B. So for some of our customers, this is just not really a big consideration. Lots of companies, typically one director you're dealing with. If you're dealing with businesses that have multiple contacts, maybe multiple directors, FD, bookkeeper, payroll manager, this can be really useful to direct different messages to different people or different numbers of people. And if you're doing that approach, you can then reference the specific person you're sending to. Client data, this is all of your client data fields. Hopefully you're all aware you can set up whatever fields you like, be they, text fields, dates, multiple choice, yes, no's, any of that sort of stuff. They're all in here. And this comes in handy in a couple of my templates today. Job, some core information about the job, like job date. So job date, just to be clear on what that will mean, if it's accounts, it's the year end. If it's VAT, it's the quarter end or month end or year end or whatever. Payroll, I tend to set them up as that's the pay day. Others do it differently. So it's that big date you see at the top of the job card, quite often quite useful. We've got all our deadlines in here. We've got the job holder. You'll be familiar with the job cards. You have your stages, your target dates and your actual dates. So you can pull in your target dates and your actual dates. Target dates can be useful for we want this by this date, or we're planning to do it by this date. Although with my example of VAT, often you can just type in, like I have, the 20th, and that works. If we're sending these messages internally, we can also link back to Glide to make it easy for the person receiving the message to click on. So let's have a quick look at my one I've got here, and then we'll jump into actually looking at how we set these up to be sent. So I've got hi recipient first name. Now, I'm going to come back to that later. There's an interesting point to mention there, but I've just got the VAT quarter 2 job date that's recently passed and a return for client name. I mean, if you do have contacts with multiple businesses, I guess good to get the client name in there. Must be submitted by job deadline. It'd be grateful if you could, confirm your records on Xero up to date as soon as possible. If you wish to supply anything, upload to your portal. And I've done an example on portal of a link. You can type out links. Some people prefer that because of nervousness around clicking on links, or you can hyperlink text. And that can either be to a static address, or you can actually have a dynamic address coming partly or fully from the client record. So yeah, I've said I want the stuff by the 15th, and I've got guidance here to come back to us. And I've just got, I'm assuming that in my situation, maybe there's lots of clients, I've allocated them to client managers. So this is going to come from the client manager. So that's that template there. And I'm just going to return to the templates now, because there is one more step, okay, that we need to consider, which is basically these send options. Are we going to use the default, or are we creating ones that are specific to this template? And generally, it's a good idea to create these rules. So I've done this already. So we just come down the bottom, click new rule. Now I've done it for all my templates. Oh, okay, I missed one. That worked out quite well. So we can do this one as an example. You can do it for from name, from address, and signature. You can get them all to create at the same time by doing that. And we're sort of saying, well, where are we getting this data from for this particular template? So our options are just to enter a value. So a bit like we do for the default value, just do a different one, whether that's a name or an address or whatever. Or we can derive it dynamically from the client record, so partner manager, or from any of our active job positions. So of course, they may be different from system to system. You can have up to 16 of those per workflow. So I'm just going to set all of mine, as I have for all of these, to manager. Bear with me one tick whilst I do that. And then you just switch them on by clicking on the red. An important thing to note. Oh, Mark, yes. How did I get here? I shall do this again. So just back to Messaging Center. So I'm in name of business, Messaging Center brings me here. I'm on the options tab and it's just advanced email sending rules. That's how I got here. Important thing to note with this, this is, I think, really good for a couple of reasons, especially if you've got numerous people managing different clients. And of course, you don't have to have a manager, it might be preparer, it might be anything. The reason it's good is I think when a contact or client receives a message, they know they have the relationship with that person. And perhaps more importantly, if they hit reply, it's going to go to that person. Glide is an email sending service, not an inbox. This allows us to ensure the reply goes to the correct person. One thing to watch out for here, when generating a message automatically, if we have an advanced send rule and we don't find data, so like if we have a client without a manager, we will force it into the queue, even if it's supposed to send automatically. And we put it in a special status, queued brackets missing data. Certainly something to be aware of. But of course, it's good practice to have all our fields up to date anyway. Right, so where are we up to? We've created a template. We've done some advanced send rules. We're pretty much ready to go with this template. So this brings me to talk about I want to cover in today's webinar 2 key mechanisms that we have for automatically, I'm going to use the word generating because, it might mean sending, it might mean queuing. That's up to you. That's the template setting. So we have 2 main mechanisms for automatically generating messages. You've then got manual ones as well, but I'm going to focus today on the automatic. Now, these are called actions and alerts, okay? And I think I'm going to start, the actions are like the better ones, in my opinion. But I'm going to start off with wrong way around. The alerts are the more capable ones, in my opinion. But let's start off by talking about actions, okay? And I've already done this, but I'm going to go through exactly what I did to set this up. So I've clicked on config and I've clicked on edit workflow systems. And today I'm doing VAT returns. Okay, so I'm going to drill into here. Now, actions. In Glide, there's loads of types of action, change job holder, set target date, update a position, create another job, all sorts of stuff. The ones we're focused on today are send an email, and I suppose send an SMS is basically identical, just sends an SMS. We can trigger these when any of our steps are run. Now, the steps, just to explain, most of the steps you'll be familiar with are the blue buttons that you click on the job card, okay? So we can trigger the generation of an email when they're clicked. You also have a creation step. Now, generally speaking, don't have an email being sent on the creation step unless it's being queued, because automatically created jobs are created at 3 a.m. It's not a great time to be emailing people. Of course, for an ad hoc job, that might work out just fine. So when would we use an action? So I think I've got one on info check complete. Now up here, we're in the visual editor. You can do everything in here now apart from add the actions. So for this, you just need to scroll right down. Soon there'll be a little link to jump down here. Scroll right down here to our older tabular editor. And this is just a list of your steps. So we have that special job creation one. If you use the pool, there's actually a taken from pool step as well. And then we just see all of our steps that are essentially the blue buttons that people click to progress jobs. And I have got one, I've got a couple, haven't I? So I've got one on info check complete. So to set this up, what I did was I just clicked, I'm going to do it on this one and then I'll delete it, create new action. And you'll see here the different actions, and send an email using a template is the one I did. And I did your VAT return information complete. Okay, so that's me choosing a template. These are the templates that we looked at a moment ago. And that's their internal name, or if there's no internal name, it'll show the subject. Here, I'm choosing who should get this message, okay? And here are the choices we have. So we have a basic search for a client email address. Now, if you choose that, the system will look at the client record. It will look at the email field by default, it's email 1, although you can change which one it looks at. And if it finds an email, it will send 1 email. If the field is blank, it won't send an email. Benefits of this approach, nice and easy, no tagging to set up or anything like that. But there are some downsides, and that's why you might want to do tagging. Now, I'm going to talk about this in more detail after we've looked at actions and alerts. So I'll probably cycle back at that point to talk about this in more detail. But suffice to say, we can tag people, specific people, on our client record on the contacts tab. So, you know, we can set up any number of tags. I've just done the one called VAT. And, you know, we might tag no one as VAT, which means no one would get this email, or we might tag someone specific, or we might tag several people. So, it would then send an email personally to those appropriate people. And crucially, we get the recipient tags, though I'll talk more about that later. So the top 2 are your external options. Everything we're talking about today can also be used internally, both actions, alerts. So I've got my list of users, and I've also got the job positions. Typically job positions, that's the way to go because it's scalable. I guess if one person always wants this email, you could specifically select that user. Right, and I'm actually just going to click cancel. I'm not going to bother setting this up because I've done it already. So this is how we set up an action. Now let's go to a job card and see this generating an email. We're also going to, this is like my simple example, and then further on in the job, I've got a more interesting example. So let's find a job. I'm just going to hopefully have a client ready on here. Yes, we do. And doing a VAT job. I think, yeah, just a brand new job here. Cool. So I'm going to actually have all my alerts set up for these first couple of stages. So when we come on to talk about alerts, we'll create a new job again. Let's get down to where my example was. So yeah, I was on a stage checking info is complete, and I have the button info check complete. So it has a little icon there just to remind people this is generating a message. So if I click that button, that has generated my message. And I think I've got this tab on my messaging center. And there we go. Because I've got my master setting as queue, because the template doesn't have a setting that overrides that, it's gone into the queue. We can see it's coming from the manager. So if we just jump back, we can see the manager. It's actually the manager on the client I chose. So that's Joe Tanza. So the advanced send rule has said it's from Joe Tanza, because when you pick it up from a user, you get the user's name in there. From email, because I've again derived it from a user, it's that user's email address. I went to the VAT tag, so I'll show you in a second how we got that. And this has converted my template into an actual message. And I've actually got Joe's signature here. I didn't quite have time to make a glorious one with images. I'm going to do that for the next webinar. So there's our first example of an action triggering a message. And like I say, for this template, it's pretty straightforward. Once I've seen 2 or 3 of these and I'm happy I've not messed something up and there's a sort of merge field that's empty, I'm going to switch this over to always send. So just to explain how I do that, I'd come back to here and I would find it. Which one was it? VAT return information complete. I just click always send. So now just those messages, when we click the blue button, they're gone. Well, basically they go into a pending queue and every 60 seconds they get sent. So it's gone pretty quickly, whereas my others are still queuing. So that's my first example there of sending a message. Now, okay, I've got another example a bit later on of another one of these, which has a few more interesting aspects. So let me just whiz down my job. Okay, okay to send to client for approval, approved. Cool, it's here. So to submit to HMRC, now increasingly I'm finding people are using the system to actually convey tax liabilities, be they VAT, other tax returns, payments on account. The payments on account example, I'm going to do a separate webinar on. I didn't feel like I'd be able to get it all in to this hour, but there's a really interesting consideration here, something that Glide, I think, deals with pretty well. So let me have a look at what I've done here. So I have got that return submitted. Where are you? Balance to pay. So this is my template that reflects there's money to pay. I've just done a really simple one here. Now, we'll talk about this in a second. You know, it's sort of saying how you go and pay. I've got the link there. Crucially, I'm merging in a field, and the field is VAT liability. So on my job card, I have job fields, and I've got one called VAT liability. It's a currency type field. Now, if this button is going to send or generate a message that is merging in a job field, absolutely critical that we put in a traffic light that means you can only click the button if the job field has data in it. So right now, I am not allowed to click that because I need to say, oh yeah, the VAT liability, 1,245 pence maybe. Now I'm allowed to click it. So that is so important. If you've got workflow actions, now of course you can't do it on the creation step. You can't traffic light them. Another reason not to do that. But on any other blue button, any field you're merging in, put in traffic light, you know, make it impossible for people to generate this message without the data going to be in there. Also, another interesting thing we're seeing here is that, you know, in a lot of Glide systems, submitted HMRC will be one button. But actually, what if there's 3 different templates? And I'll talk more about this later. But what if we've got balance to pay, no balance? I didn't quite get around to it, but maybe refund as well. Because we're going to find out about this in the middle of the job, we basically will handle this by having more than one button. And all I've done here is my submitted to HMRC no balance is sending a different template, no balance. There we go. If you wanted to be ultra careful, you could block that pending a field that says no balance, set it to yes, you know, make people think twice about things. Jane, thank you for your comment there. Can I share my templates? I'm really looking to find a way to do that. Workflows, we have the templates, about 70 of them. It's never included the email templates. That's something we need to change. But as of this very second, we can't do that. But, you know, hopefully something we'll have in the future. Apologies. Happy to help you set them up, of course. Right. Yeah, so this is nice. You know, balance to pay, no balance. And as I say, I had the no balance button just there and people can click it. You might want to put a traffic light on it, make people think twice. I've helped a lot of people with personal tax actually who have, you only want to ask for this distinction when we're certain it's finalized. So you can do it on client approved, because if they've approved it, I guess it's not going to change. I've done it here on to submit HMRC. A nice example on personal tax is that we have the same with like balancing payment only, payments on account, refund, nothing, refund and payments on account. And that can both trigger the email telling them and progress another job that is the payment on account reminder. So that's the one that I'm gonna hold for another webinar because it just takes a little while. Do you have to create job field? Yes, Claire, thanks for your question. I've got the job field here, VAT liability. You might not have that. So let me explain how I got that. I've come into config, edit workflow systems. I've come into VAT returns and elements, job fields. So job fields, think of this like client fields, but rather than being on your job card, rather than being on your client card, they're on your job card. You've got all the same choices here and you can use a traffic light to block on completion of any of them. So loads of different stuff you can be capturing there. That's how you would, so I did currency field on mine. I mean, text would be fine for this purpose as well. But yeah, I did currency. So there's my VAT liability. When you add a job field, it will automatically put it on all of your routes. So if you don't want it on some, just delete it off. You'll see them down here. I'm going to talk about having multiple routes in a moment. Righty. Thanks, Guy. Yeah, so good question coming in from Guy. click a blue button, generate an email, press undo, go backwards, click it again. What happens? Yeah, it would actually generate it a second time. Perhaps something for us to ponder whether there's any sort of protection we can build in. But yeah, absolutely it would. It's not uncommon, perhaps for that reason, to see people having a blue button option that says brackets no email. I've got one of those examples on here that I'll show you in a second. But yeah, you're absolutely right, Guy. It would do. There's some advanced tricks you can do to prevent that, though I don't, we might, you know, it might take us a little too much of the webinar to go through them, but you could change the job status and that a button can become invisible after it's been clicked once and it could be replaced with a different one. But I'm not, I probably need to go through that separately. Perhaps I'll add that onto the advanced webinar that we'll do next. But yeah, just to confirm, absolutely correct what you're saying there. Yeah, and your suggestion there is quite right. Going in the queue, although it de-automates a little bit, it would deal with that problem. Cool, okay, right. So we've looked at our actions here. Blue button clicks, send. And don't forget, these can be internal as well. And don't forget, I don't know how many of you do this, but routes. You can have as many routes on a workflow system as you like. I just want to briefly touch on this. This might be things like VAT brackets we do bookkeeping, VAT brackets client does bookkeeping, VAT brief review only. You can have different versions. You have a default route, and any client that uses not the default, you put them on the other route. I won't go into detail on that. That's kind of a different topic, but of course that allows you to vary everything, not just your email templates, which might have an impact on the wording, but also stages, target dates, everything. So it's important to mention that dimension as well. Right, we're at the halfway point. So I want to jump on to talk about alerts. As I said before, these feel more powerful to me. That said, an action, you know, if there is an event that happens and you need to click the blue button to confirm it's happened, the action is the tool for the job. Get the blue button to send the email. You know, that is going to do a great job. So event-driven stuff like, yes, we've submitted this or whatever. But if we can get something, if something is suitable for an alert, it would be crazy to have it as an action because you're creating this job for yourself of clicking the button. So let's move on to talk about alerts. So broadly speaking, what is an alert? Well, at 9:30 every morning, Glide cycles through all the Glide systems. It cycles through looking for alerts, and any that it finds, it will cycle through all jobs and determine if a message needs to be sent. I actually think it's something we do really well. And in part, it's because of the accuracy of the job progression. So let me have a look, talk through some examples of this. The examples I've got here are initial email after that quarter. Okay. And then I've got my, so that's like asking for the info effectively. And then I've got VAT return chaser 1, second VAT chaser 20 days. So I've got sort of 3 messages here. They're going to be sent automatically. As I say, of course, if they're going in the queue, you need to approve them. But once they're not going in the queue, this is fully automated. You know, job creates itself, info request, info chasers, all automated. And I mentioned earlier, another new thing this week, these email alerts can now progress your jobs. So there's no reason why a VAT return can't find its way to, I guess you would still click info received, but that should be the first button you have to click, unless you want to invoke some manual chasing. So let's have a look at, you know, we'll glance quickly at my templates. They're pretty obvious what they're saying. You know, you set the template up in exactly the same way. And then, you know, what I would say is we've got that same consideration of fields. Are they going to contain data? Now, if you're sending an alert the day after a job creates, if that field needs to be manually entered, don't put it in your message template. You know, you can't just hope that someone does it in the day. There's no traffic light here, although there is an equivalent that I'll come on to. But yeah, it's worth considering that, isn't it? So let's have a look at how I set them up. So again, I'm on my route, okay? Config, edit workflow systems, drill into VAT. And again, alerts are route specific. So we might have different ones for different routes. We just scroll down a little bit below our diagram and below these bits, and we find them here. so we can create as many of these as we need. I've got my one set up already, so I'm going to edit them and show you the settings that I chose. So linked to, this is all about helping the system know when it should potentially send these messages. So we have choices of job date, deadline, and you would then choose the deadline, target date and actual date. And for those two, you would choose the stage. So for my one, I've done job date, which in this instance will mean the VAT quarter end. Okay. I've done an offset of 1. We might promote this to be just there. It's kind of the next thing you think about. So VAT quarter end plus a day. Okay. If you're doing like minus, you can do that. That's fine. Just make sure your job will exist. You know, if you're creating your job on VAT quarter end -3, don't send an alert on -4 because it won't work. And release filter. Now for this initial one, for sending an info request on VAT quarter plus a day, arguably I don't need a release filter. You know, I could just say always send, but I've actually done it so it's only sending. These are the 3 most useful settings, by the way. If you're doing it relative to a deadline, you can only send if deadline is not achieved. But these 3 will only send based upon the stage the job is on. So when we're doing chasing, this is critical. We only want to chase if the info is not in. So you can either have stage is less than or more than or equals. And the value we are entering is the stage order value. I'll show you in a second where that comes from. So this alert will send on VAT quarter end plus a day only if the job is on the job stage order 10. I'll show you that in a second. We choose our template. So again, we've got a list of templates there. I've done the initial email out of that quarter. Delivery target, identical consideration as it was on the action. External basic, external tag, internal user, internal position. I've gone for external tag. Delivery method, you know, everything we're talking about today is email or SMS. And this is the brand new bit this week. Progress job if message created. Now, I'm doing info requested. When I jump onto my job card or my diagram, I'll show you exactly what that means. But pretty obvious what it means is the alert is going to, if it successfully generates a message, it will progress the job to save a human having to click that if there is an equivalent stage. Right, I'm going to click cancel here, just show you where this 10 comes from. Because as you'll see, first we'll just look at these 2. So these are my chasers. Now, I have, and I thoroughly recommend when you're doing chasers on like one, say if it's accounts, you know, 60 days, 90 days, 120 days, or tax returns, have a different template for everyone. Let's not just be pinging off the same message. And of course, that gives you the opportunity to gradually escalate the language. So here I've got, you know, a polite reminder that I'm sending out 10 days after quarter end. I've then gone a bit nuclear on 20 days. This is perhaps not realistic, but I wanted to demonstrate the point. So like in this one, we're threatening them with not being able to do it and them getting fined, just really to demonstrate the point. Okay, so these settings will be remarkably similar. Again, I'm leveraged off my job date. I will do an example in a second where it's off something else, just so we can consider that. So it's my job date plus 10 days. I'm only sending if I'm on a stage order value of 20. Again, we'll look at that in a second. My template is my chaser 1, delivery target VAT tag via email. And I've got a step called info automatically chased. Okay. And the next one is exactly the same, just a different template. Now, scroll up to the top, click on elements, and scroll down a tiny bit. You've got your job stages. The display order here is what I'm doing the filtering by. Yeah, so my first one, I'm only sending if it's on 10. My second one, I'm only sending if it's on 20. As I said, for the initial request, you probably want it to go all the time, so you could not bother with that. But for chasing, it's absolutely critical that you put in only send when it's on. You're basically saying when it's on this stage, but we record it via the stage order value. Right, so let's actually look at a job and talk about how that would work. For that purpose, I'm going to create a brand new job. Now, I can't literally simulate these alerts happening because they do happen at 9:30 in the morning. But what would happen here is this job's on the appropriate route. Okay, so 9:30 in the morning, it's going to be scanning and it would go, oh, 30 November 2022. And I think I was sending it on +1. So if it's the 1st of December 2022, this job would generate an alert. Based on the template setting, it would either queue or send. Okay, it'd be visible down here. And crucially, because I've got the auto job progress set up, it would automatically click this button for me. Okay, so it's automatically going to come onto it. Now, imagine it didn't find an email address. It's not going to progress the job. You know, it's only going to progress the job if a message is generated. Then we're on awaiting books and records. So here I've got the 2 chasers. So again, mine would be 10th of December 2022 and 20th of December 2022. Obviously, you can do whatever days you like. I'm going to get those 2 messages. They're only going to go if I'm on exactly this stage. And again, they're going to auto progress a step called info chased brackets automatically, which I've hidden. You know, I don't want users clicking that because I felt it was nice to have the alert clicking its own button. So, you know, if we do some manual chasing, okay, so I've got a few of those, you would then be able to drill in and see the ones that the email click would say chased automatically by email. So that's quite nice. I've also here, just as a, you know, to throw this in, I've also got a button that can send the chaser email. Now, whether that's the same template or a different one, in theory, if you've got it all automated, you don't need that. Or what I've seen a couple of people doing is maybe thinking of accounts, maybe the first 3 chasers click one button that just loops nowhere and records a chase. And then maybe the 4th button sends an email and progresses onto a new stage called manual chasing. And then on your dashboard in your progress manager, very clear, well, these jobs are being auto chased. These ones are getting in a dire state. I need to do it myself. Loads of different things you can do. I just want to mention before I forget it, another tip that actually came in from a client recently in relation to tax returns. They'd actually used this system last year and found it had improved their turnaround time. That was actually what led to me thinking of doing the webinar and the title of the webinar. But they had a really good question. They said, well, what if a client, I think they had automated chasers on like 60, 90, 120, etc. What if a client joins the practice on the 119th day after the tax year end? Are we going to send them this really hardcore you're in trouble message the next day? And of course the answer is no, that would be madness. So we thought about it for a little while. I didn't quite have time to rig it up here, but what we actually did was on our first stage, we had a button that says first year job, and it put it into a different stage called awaiting books and records brackets first year. And we didn't have, and therefore the alerts weren't triggering. And the idea was that in a first year, you know, you're onboarding the client generally, we're going to get this info in. We don't need to be harassing them. So I thought that was something I'd never thought of. That came in from a customer. Okay, so yeah, that's how our alerts are going to sort of generate there. I'd activated this little send email widget because I was going to generate them manually, but I don't actually think we need to do that to sort of fully appreciate how the alerts work. Send email, by the way, this is great for testing. There's a little setting in config, advanced config settings, where you can make this visible to super users. It allows you to trigger any of your templates to any of your targets. And you know, it's useful because, of course, if you're setting up an alert today, you have to kind of wait for tomorrow for it to be tested. So that's a good way of doing it. In the fullness of time, that will blossom into a proper sort of fire up a draft email on this screen, muck about with it, send it. That's not quite there just yet. Okay, so I just want to, you know, I just want to jump back into those alerts, and conscious that we've got that bit of time for questions at the end as well. I just want to jump back in here and edit one of my alerts and just think about what other settings might be useful for. So I've talked about job date. Anything requesting info, chasing info, typically be leveraged off the job date. A good example of an actual date, okay, might be, let's say, info checked. So we've got an actual date on info checked, and then you could say, if I'm on, and you put in the value for not yet started, okay? So you could say, if there's an actual date in info checked, and 10 days later, we're still on not started, you could trigger an alert to the preparer or to the manager. So that's a nice example there of using an actual date. Of course, you can do the same with target dates. And you know, an example of a deadline would be, I'm not sure you do this on VAT, but I have seen this being done on things like corporation tax accounts. You choose your deadline. I've only got one here, but there might be multiple. And we'd probably say send only if deadline not fulfilled. And your offset, of course, is going to be minus in this instance. You know, if 20 days before the deadline, if it's not done, email the partner, you know, that sort of thing. Now, it's going to send an email for every job. Okay, so we want to sort of reserve this for real sort of like, wow, why is this like this? Send me an email. You wouldn't set this up if you're expecting to receive 30 or 40 jobs hitting this criteria, because with this being primarily designed for external communications, you do get one email per job. Yeah, hopefully in the future we'll have the ability to email reports internally, which would mean you've got fewer emails. But as I say, if there's a situation you can define that it's just a disaster, like this needs filing in 5 days' time, we've not even got the information in, that could be a good one for an email. Absolutely. Okay, thank you, Steph, for pinging in your question there. Now, at the moment, Glide doesn't do attachments. It's an interesting one. So it was requested a lot a few years ago. We've actually proceeded sort of mirroring how SharePoint Online, Outlook Online, when you attach things, are now attached as a link. We've actually generally recommended people utilize links, and any sort of client-specific personal documents tend to be increasingly in a portal. And of course, you can link to that portal, either a generic address, or if there's a client-specific parameter in the URL, you can achieve that too. So I still suspect at some point we will add attachments, but we're trying to nudge people down the linking route. If you've got a generic sort of flyer, it's pretty easy to have that just hosted on your web server and link to it, or on SharePoint. You can obviously get links as well, or Google Drive, or all those services. So we've kind of resisted that, I guess. But it is still something for us to consider in the future. So I'm afraid you can't at the moment, Steph, but equally, ping me an email with your example, and typically a way you can achieve that with the IT tools you've got at your disposal. Okay, yeah, so alerts, as I say, alerts, I really like them because, you know, they just, there's lots of options in there. They can be really sort of powerful. Okay, I'm in my final 3 minutes here. Luckily, we've got through most of the things I wanted to talk about. There's a couple of advanced things that I think we'll park in a different webinar, but let me just mention them so you know whether that's a relevant one for you to come to or not. I want to talk a bit more about, we've got various versions of this email. How do we achieve that? Because there's numerous potential answers to that question. We've seen the routes here. So you just have different cohorts of clients on different routes. That's all within one workflow system. And of course, on a route, we're setting up alerts and actions that are specific to that route. So they can be different in every way. That's good where you have prior knowledge that the clients are different. What about when the knowledge transpires during the job? Like our example of the VAT payment. Is there a payment? Is there not a payment? Well, typically, we're just going to have multiple buttons for our actions. Or maybe we've even routed the job down a different part of the workflow and you only see one button and it is the correct button, and different jobs will be elsewhere. Now with the alerts, you can achieve the same, because on our payment on account system, the tax return job will auto progress that to a dedicated stage based upon the situation. And then our alerts are linked to that particular stage. So you can achieve that. I also am just remembering to mention, I said about the traffic lights on actions to make sure you can't click it unless you've got your data. The equivalent on alerts is that you'd need to filter the alert to only send based on a certain stage. And then in your workflow, if you're going to let a job get to that stage, have the traffic light. So it broadly becomes similar. But as I was saying, if you've got an alert on job date +1, no one's going to fill anything in. Just don't have any fields in there unless they're derived from client information, of course. Yeah, and the final option for different styles of message, different templates in the same situation, is to use the tags. So let me just jump and have a look at the tagging. So for our example customer Glide, You know, the basic choice, if you do basic, when you set up your action or alert and you say basic client email address, it's going to use email 1. Note, you can change that. So do be aware of what your setting is, but I'm sure they'll all be email 1. If you've got an action or alert sending on the basic setting for an organization, you cannot use recipient first name, recipient surname. These companies have no first and surname. What people do instead is they create a client field called known as, and on their email templates, rather than going recipient first name, they'll go client data known as. If you do the tagging, which, as I say, let's just quickly chat about this, then we'll jump onto questions. The tagging brings a lot more flexibility. Broadly speaking, we can have multiple recipients. We are able to address them all individually, and we can use it as a filter. And the filter is actually links back to that whole, I've got 3 versions of my message. If you want one route, but you want 3 versions of your message, you can just have 3 actions or 3 alerts, target a different tag, and make sure you just pop the appropriate tag on your contact. That's quite a heavy hitting thing just to drop in at the end. Hence, there's going to be a different webinar where we do some examples of that. But yeah, we haven't looked at this previously, so it's nice just to look. In my example emails, because I've been targeting a tag, it hasn't been looking at email 1. Instead, it's gone to contacts. There may be multiple contacts here. In this case, I've just got 1, and the tag is applied. So it's going to send to that contact's email. And crucially, contacts are people. You cannot have a company on here. It's either individual clients or pure contacts. You can add pure contacts. And on here, I could link my existing ones, or I could create new ones and apply tags. You can also apply other tags just here. To create your tags, you just go to the menu here, contacts, contact tag editor. Right, I'm sure I'll probably have missed something, but we're down to our final 9 minutes. So I think I've probably covered everything I want. So I'll just open it up for any questions, just ping them in the chat box. And as I was saying earlier, I'm going to record this as well. Yeah, Claire, thank you. Yes, all your emails will be visible on your client card and on your job card. I have to own up here to a limitation. You can't actually open them. You can just read about them. That's something I'm going to be addressing as soon as possible. So currently, let me show you exactly what I mean by that. If we go to our Glide client, I've just got my Zoom bit in the way. Let me find it. There it is. On the client record, we have email, SMS messages. They're all here. Clearly, you know, we want this to be a link to open it. I'm going to get that sorted. At the moment, you go to the messaging center and look for them. Yeah, apologies. That's not ideal, is it? But yeah, certainly something we can address. Oh, and this reminds me of something that we haven't talked about. If you do go for the Glide server option sent via SendGrid, we'll get these 4 date stamps: created, sent. Now, of course, sent might be later because you might have queued and then sent, delivered and opened. Unless your client is sort of obscuring that opened. I don't really know how they do it, but it tells you when they open the message. It seems pretty reliable. That's at a client level, and at a specific job level, we get the same. So if we go on here, we haven't actually, let me just send one there. Fresh. We get the exact same information here. Again, you can't click on it though, Claire, but definitely something we'll be addressing in the fullness of time. Okay, right, another question. Oh, cool, yeah, cool. Just Claire saying, okay, great. Right, well, we've got a few more minutes. I'm just going to sit back, look for any more questions and try and think of anything I may have forgotten to mention today. Yeah, I suppose just chat about the other server option. So, or options. That's interesting, Mark. So Mark's saying that he's not getting those other date stamps there. So we'll have a look at that perhaps separately. I'm just wondering whether you're using SendGrid option. Well, we shall have a look. We'll have a look at that, Mark, separately. I'll drop you an email. Okay, the target dates. Yeah, what I can do, if I'm able to get your email address, I don't know if I can or not, but I can send you a link to that. Basically, to answer it quickly, on every job card, every stage has a target date field. You could fill them in manually, but that's not the best way to do it. The best way to do it is in Edit Workflow Systems. It's another action. So much like we were adding the email action, you can add actions that generate target dates stated as either a number of calendar days or working days. I've got another video on this case, so I will attempt to find your email address and send you a link to it, or just ping me an email or a message through the help. But this is how you do it. A really useful part of the system, and on your dashboard then you can have your targets widget, and of course your alerts could be leveraged off them as well. Thank you, Kate. That's fantastic. Lovely. Just going to copy and paste that, and I'll ping you I shall ping you a link to that. Yeah, so Guy's just asking, can we get a download of all contacts? Yeah, I actually have a really nice report that shows all clients, all linked contacts, all tags applied, all email addresses, which allows you to answer those questions like, have I applied to tags on all my clients? Have they got email addresses? Now, currently that's a custom report I add on system by system. We're going to get it published in the Glide system ASAP. If you feel like you really need that, just ping me a message and I can get that one on your system. There's also another place where you can do a bit of this, although it's not as good as my report just yet, but it's worth drawing your attention to this. In the client database query engine, you can output contact count, tag count, and tagged contact for each tag. So it would be possible to say, show me if I've got a client tagged as VAT, and I want to see all my clients where VAT returns equals active. Okay, so I haven't got any. That wasn't the best example there. Anyway, you get the idea with that one. But like I say, there is a new report taking shape, and I can get a sort of beta version of it onto specific systems, or in the fullness of time, we'll obviously have that in the Glide system, which allows you to very quickly say, show me all my accounts clients and tell me if any haven't got an email address, or any haven't got any contacts with this tag, haven't got an email address, or quite simply any active clients haven't got a linked contact. So if that sounds of interest, let me know, and it will be finding its way into the system soon. Okay, yeah, we've got a few more minutes. So I was just going to explain about the other server option, wasn't I? So there's three options. You've got the Glide Send Grid. Like I say, 99% of people probably use that. I think that's, thank you, Kay, cheers, bye-bye. I think that's the way to go. Yes, Kate, just to clarify, recording, yeah, the recording of this webinar, I'll get it up on our Vimeo and paste a link in various places this evening. Alex, is there any way that all the tweaks you make are noted? Alex, I'm not entirely sure which tweaks you're referring to, whether that's me in the webinar or a log in your system, perhaps. I'll go with the latter. Yes, sorry, thanks for confirming. Glide logs everything, but not changes in config. So we kind of rely there upon the super user access being sort of withheld generally to certain people. And we don't log those changes, not to my knowledge anyway. So at the moment, the answer is we don't, unfortunately. Again, something that I'll feed back to the team. I appreciate what you're saying. You want to, perhaps you're giving a couple of people access, etc. Okay. Oh, sorry. I now understand Alex's question correctly. Obviously, I've mentioned in the webinar a couple of new things: internal name, progressing jobs automatically. That should be on our help and change log. I'm not that great at updating it, but it's my New Year's resolution. It's going to be every change will feature on there. I'm going to get those changes on there later today. Yeah, historically, a lot of changes do miss off of there, but that's for me to improve upon. And you can consider that a reliable source of changes going forward. And we've got quite a lot of stuff upcoming, as I alluded to, perhaps in these invites. So yeah, looking forward to getting all of that up there. I just want to sort of finish this point about the server, just in case there's any interest to anyone. So Glide sends the messages. That's really the best way to do it. It uses SendGrid, which is a very powerful global leader in deliverability. It gets us the delivered, those other date stamps. Now, what are your other options? Well, you can put in SMTP credentials. Currently, one set of credentials per system. So you would need to put in credentials for an Exchange user that had access to any email addresses you were planning to send from, potentially everyone in the business. Now, this, for a couple of our clients, a couple of our larger clients, in fact, this works really well, but they had to go through a bit of pain to get it there, because often with an Exchange setting up and I don't really understand the ins and outs of this, but they had to think about rate limiting, because of course our alerts might fire off 1,000 messages on the 5th of April. So they had to think about that. By default, SMTP credentials are probably limited to a certain number of messages. And they had to think about something else as well, which I can't remember. So for me, it always felt like a bit of a pain, but for some organizations, it's worth getting that set up. If they have the IT expertise in-house, it's more feasible for them than some of our customers. So you've got that one. The third server option you'll see is webhooks. So this is where you replace the physical delivery of the email generates, but rather than us attempting to deliver it either via SendGrid or SMTP, we actually trigger a webhook. So you could then use a service such as Zapier or Microsoft Flow to capture that webhook and deliver the message some other way. It would have all the information there from name, subject, body, etc., etc., etc. So that's another thing you could do. But yeah, I'm a big fan of the SendGrid option for numerous reasons. One thing to reiterate before we go, I said it at the outset, domain authentication. This is key, really. You know, if you are sending through the SendGrid using your domain, get in touch with me if you're not sure if you've done that. Done it for loads of people, but there could be some that haven't. And we'll get that set up. Cool. Okay, well, we've got to the end of our hour. There's no more chats popping up, so hopefully we've covered any questions coming up. Conscious everyone will need to get back to work. So yeah, just to say thank you very much. We haven't done lots of these. We're going to be doing a lot more going forward. We're really keen to make sure that every Glide user is at least aware of the functionality we've built and hopefully is deploying it effectively in their practice. So we're going to do much more of these. And I'll obviously put the invites up on the login news page. I just did the invite this time for super users because I felt that was appropriate, because we're using the config menu. You guys are the only ones that have access to that. If you've got any feelings about whether it would be more useful to just invite everyone, just let me know. We're also going to have an events page in the help that everyone will be able to see. So yeah, hopefully you found it useful. Just going to quickly check if we've got any more questions coming in. Cool, just people saying cheers and bye. Fantastic. Okay, right, thank you all for your time. I'll ping a message out when this is sort of online, so to say. And on that note, I will end the webinar. Cheers, guys. Thanks very much. Bye.